This video is going to answer one simple question that our game journalists of today asked to everyone who clicked on their article.
Why are game companies so afraid of the politics in their games? Social issues are profitable, they just don't want to talk about it.
What are you talking about? Game companies are not afraid of the politics in their games, and I can prove to you right away by citing the games that you yourself cited. Deus Ex Mankind Divided talks about mechanical apperfied. Far Cry 5 talks about religious extremism. Detroit Become Human talks about racism and slavery. The Division 2 is a freaking Tom Clancy game. Now you can have all your opinions of whether or not these games do the job as well, but I'm just merely stating that they did tackle political themes. It's me stating that McDonald's make burgers. They tend to be bad or good burgers depending on your perspective, but regardless of your opinions, we can all agree that they make burgers. So all of those games tackle their political elements in their games, but why are you saying that game developers are so afraid of them?
Game publishers are lavering their productions with the stark imagery of modern political divisions, while at the same time denying any topical intent.
What do you mean as denying any topical intent? Do you mean that these game developers refuse to take a side in any of the political spectrum for the issues that they tackled in their games? So now let's get to the specifics in what they mean as denying any political intent.
Deus Ex Mankind Divided posited a world of cybernetic enhancements divided by mechanical apperfied, but publisher Square Enix repeatedly denied that its imagery of societal separation and prison camps had anything to do with the real world of racial divisions.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with real-world racial divisions, because I'm very sure the real-world racial divisions aren't as intense as they were portrayed in Mankind Divided.
Far Cry 5 portrayed a rural, anti-government American cult in which bastardized crosses were wielded by fanatics, but publisher Ubisoft refused to be drawn on obvious comparisons with currently resurgent white supremacist groups.
Does it really need to have obvious comparisons being drawn to the currently resurging white supremacist groups? I've tackled this topic before in another video and said that game journalists only want video games to be a megaphone for their politics rather than, something fun and entertaining for everyone. I mean, Far Cry 5 is a really flawed but admittedly pretty fun game, and Deus Ex Mankind Divided, well, Mankind Divided is definitely pretty accurate.
Sony's Detroit Become Human flirts with issues like social justice and domestic abuse, but its creator David Cage says it's really about androids, further claiming that the clear real-world parallels in his work are merely in the eyes of the players.
I can't believe that you made me to agree with David Cage on this one, because David Cage is actually talking some sense in this case. Yes, the clear real-world parallels in his work are merely in the eyes of the players, like for example the very obviously Hillary Clinton as the in-game president. But like I said in my review of this game, the way the game handles the complex themes are incredibly simplistic, and it really diminishes the impact of the storyline once it becomes incredibly obvious of what kind of themes that the game wants to tackle.
At E3 last week, Ubisoft heavily publicized The Division 2, set in Washington, D.C. in the near future. The game asked players to fight back against a corrupt government and help save the United States from tyrants. Despite obvious parallels with the current political landscape of the United States, Ubisoft continues to deny any real-world inference, even in the face of incredulity.
I think we have talked about this very briefly in my E3 Shenanigans video right in the end, where a bunch of game journalists want to talk about how The Division has parallels to the real world and that they're not making any sorts of political statement. In my last video, I said that there needs to be a distinction between in-game political statement and real-world political statement. So in Division, for example, if we take the context of the game's post-apocalyptic event, the assault towards Washington, D.C. is a political statement to rebel against the tyrants who rule Washington, D.C. Now, this can be interpreted as a real-world political statement, but that's essentially it. It's an interpretation. That interpretation is entirely up to you. Why do game developers not associate this obvious imagery with the real world? Because it's a video game where people want to have fun. Asking game developers to make a political statement is basically you asking them to make your personal interpretation to be the canon one. Which, don't get me wrong, there are people who want their headcanons to be the real canon, but these people cope with their headcanons by making fan fictions, not asking game developers to make it canon.
In the aftermath of Polygon's E3 interview with The Division 2's creative director Terry Spire, Ubisoft was widely mocked for its determination to avoid taking sides in the midst of a raging culture war. Consumers are starting to take note of the discrepancy between the games they play and the messages they hear coming out of media events like E3.
I am very much in tune with the gaming news. I am almost 24 hours on Twitter watching almost anything and everything that is happening. The only people who mock Ubisoft's determination to avoid taking sides are either game journalists or political activists who are disappointed that Ubisoft Senpai didn't make their interpretation canon. And like I said, these activists want Ubisoft to be their megaphone. You can certainly know this by the writer's disappointment in Ubisoft for not taking sides in the midst of a raging culture war. Now, we are certainly in the midst of a raging culture war, but the thing about culture war is that it's true to its first descriptor. It's raging, it's exhausting, it's gonna make people angry. This is precisely why I take my vacations, playing JRPGs and post garbage on the internet. What is my line? Ladies and gentlemen, the world today is in chaos. Right now, I will bring you all peace and a better future for everybody. Appabend 2020, sponsored by... So writer, you know very well how the culture war works, and you yourself know how tiresome it is. So why do you want a video game to participate in it and remind you of it? Isn't video games supposed to be a great way to escape from them, rather than being a constant reminder that the world is garbage and you can't do anything about it? People have been talking about how the Article 13 is going to impose a YouTube content ID policy throughout the entire internet, and I'm very sure that none of them wants this sort of stuff to be talked about in their video games.
Ultimately, companies create games and then release them into a world that shapes a larger context. These games may have intended meanings in their designs, but this changes throughout their conception, development, production, circulation, and reception. Context shapes them across time. In other words, a game company's intent does not solely drive meaning.
That doesn't mean that your interpretation should be the one that the game developers adopt. That doesn't mean that they should be the canon one.
While games tend to take a broadly progressive view of the world, game company marketing departments understand that explicitly stating hostility towards reactionary positions risks the enmity of right-wing media, streamers, and online communities.
Ooh, nice point, game journalists. Game developers are afraid of right-wing reactionaries? Please provide examples, because so far you're only providing examples of left-wing reactionaries. Now, as I illustrated in my E3 video, there are gonna be reactionaries to video games from many sides. Even in a video game that people universally anticipate, like Smash Brothers, have people harassing the game developers. And by people, I mean one account who spammed the developers demanding where the hell is Waluigi at. This is incredibly petty and stupid, but that's just the internet for you. It's full of weirdos and people who deserves to be made fun of instead of being taken seriously.
Game developers and publishers that are seen to be pandering to liberal values have often been targeted by online mobs. Examples demonstrate the obnoxious nature of a section of the gaming audience, which is convinced that games are being hijacked by a cabal of social justice warriors as a platform for progressive values.
Jesus Christ, Polygon, talk about zero self-awareness. I've already discussed this on my post-E3 video. Yes, there are games that pander to liberal values, or at least can be interpreted as pandering to liberal values. For example, there are some who consider Gears of War 5 having a female protagonist to be a move pandering to feminists and SJWs. I personally don't. I just think that this is another game with a female protagonist, and I'm a lot more concerned about the quality of the game. There are people in both sides of the arguments that are pretty dumb, cannot be constructive, and merely put their arguments for outrage baiting. I don't see any constructive purpose in criticizing a game for having a female protagonist, the same way I don't see any constructive purpose in criticizing a game for being sexy. That's not a criticism actually, that's a praise, especially for SoulCalibur, which Kotaku just wrote a hit piece on. Maybe give examples in the sorts of games that fall under the wrath of right-wing reactionaries. I have tons of games that fall under the wrath of left-wing reactionaries, but I'm not gonna waste too much time here. See my previous video.
Nintendo's decision to localize Xenoblade Chronicles X, taking out a customization slider that altered female breast size, sparked harassment and doxing against a Nintendo employee. Battlefield 5's use of a woman character in a World War II setting has caused untold controversy among reactionaries.
Okay, writer, this is where both of your examples crush you because both of them are based on many horrendous misinformation. First off, the Nintendo employee that you cited is Alison Rapp, who not only isn't responsible for the change, but she actually wanted the boob slider in the first place. Second, your article citing Allison talks about how she was fired thanks to having a second job that goes against Nintendo's work culture. But the article focuses on how that only makes the harassers on the internet wins. And by harassers, I mean the people who reported to Nintendo that she has a second permanent job. And if you're not counting on those, we also have people who strictly go against her comments defending child pornography. Anyway, going back to the article, IGDA's executive director Kate Edwards' criticism is basically, if you have a woman who is breaking Nintendo's policies and people report it to Nintendo about it, we're gonna have more and more women being fired for breaking company's policies. Thank you for the absolutely zero contribution to the conversation. She even blatantly states, regardless of the exact reasons why the employee was fired. Regardless of the exact reasons. Yes, I know that Allison broke the company's policies, but this marks the horrible dystopian future of women being fired from their jobs thanks to breaking the company's policies. It highlights how utterly bizarre your priority is when you care more about people being mean on the internet towards women than an employee of Nintendo breaking the company's policies. As for Battlefield 5, see this video.
Investors dislike controversy and are prone to flee. CEOs of game companies that are owned by massive non-gaming corporations are rarely keen to explain negative headlines to their bosses. Staff morale can take a massive hit from waves of internet fury.
So, the best thing to do is to bait them to make controversies?
For the moment, games that take an openly political stance tend to be the independent rather than the big budget productions. Christian Miller is a Hawaii-based game developer.
Oh my god, goodness gracious. I'm gonna leave this clip from Zero Punctuation's Agony review.
Let's all stroke our chins about misogyny and then give excessive coverage to an indie game made by someone I know.
Big budget movies like Black Panther embrace difficult messages in the content and in external messaging. If its director Ryan Coogler or publisher Walt Disney Studios had tried to pretend it was just a story about an African king rather than a reflection of societal and historical wrongs, he would rightly have been mocked.
Did Black Panther tackle any sorts of political themes, or at least political themes that haven't been tackled by many other movies in the past but better? I mean, I enjoyed Black Panther, but it's not a film that I would consider revolutionary, unless your perception of black people in films existed merely in current year alone, which is how a lot of journalists operate these days. Black Panther is not really that clever of a movie to have a serious message about our own current society. I read the article that you cited, and it's just the writer's interpretation that goes absolutely freaking bananas the moment he said that For Ragnarok is a direct commentary to Trump's America. Maybe I'm not too politically minded for this conversation. Maybe I'm just a filthy traditionalist pleb who just wants good and enjoyable films, rather than those that pretend that it's something that would change the world or something.
Unlike in other entertainment media, games do not have to answer the powerful critics with wide readership in high-value media outlets. This is changing as gaming critics expand their horizons beyond value for money or absurd playability metrics.
Well, that explains why there are so many terrible gameplay videos from Polygon. I mean, this paragraph essentially says, screw criticizing games for gameplay, screw criticizing games based on the value of your money. We game critics are now going to criticize your video games through our own political lens. And if we deem it problematic, screw you too. I think that's a brilliant way to end this article, and I think that's a great answer to your initial question. Do you want to know why game companies decide to not politicize their games or take any sort of side? Because they realize that both sides in the political spectrum are filled with idiots, and you just so happen to be the most influential side of the table. So how about this? Instead of fulfilling the political needs of either, we're just gonna make good games with good stories, okay? Wait, that's not okay too? Well, don't worry, publishers and developers. You cannot please both sides of the spectrum, but I am not on the both sides of the spectrum. You can definitely please me. And the best way for you to please me if you send Xseed love, support, encouragement, and preferably some big bucks to port and localize Trails of Cold Steel 3.